They thought she was a nobody. They thought she was just the quiet, discarded wife of Richard Sterling, destined to fade into poverty, while he flaunted his mistress and his millions. But they made one fatal mistake. They confused silence with weakness. When Clara Sterling signed those divorce papers with 0 demands, no alimony, no assets, nothing, her husband laughed. He didn't know that the woman standing in the rain wasn't losing a fortune. She was returning to one. Fast forward 3 weeks to the shattered silence of a crowded courtroom, the roar of a Gulfstream G650ER engine cutting through the sky, and an entrance that would make the world tremble. This isn't just a divorce story. It's a reckoning. The rain in Seattle didn't just fall. It hammered against the floor-to-ceiling glass of the penthouse like an accusation. Inside the sprawling living room of the Sterling estate, the air was colder than the storm outside. Richard Sterling sat on the Italian leather sofa, his posture relaxed, almost bored. He checked his Patek Philippe watch, a subtle flex of impatience. Standing behind him, with a hand possessively resting on his shoulder, was Jessica, his executive assistant, though the tabloids had already given her a less professional title. She wore a diamond tennis bracelet that Clara recognized. It had been an anniversary gift 3 years ago. Across from them sat Clara. She looked small in the oversized armchair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore no jewelry. Her face was pale, devoid of makeup, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, practical bun. To Richard, she looked like exactly what he believed her to be, a plain, unremarkable woman he had plucked from obscurity 5 years ago, now past her expiration date. "Let's not make this difficult, Clara," Richard said, sliding the thick stack of documents across the mahogany coffee table. "The terms are clear. The prenuptial agreement stands. You get the lump sum we agreed upon, $50,000, enough to start over in wherever it is you came from. Kentucky, Ohio." "Iowa," Clara said softly. Her voice was steady, betraying nothing. "Right. Iowa." Richard smirked, exchanging a glance with Jessica. Jessica suppressed a giggle, tracing a finger along Richard's collar. "You leave the house by tomorrow morning. The cars, the jewelry, the accounts, they stay. You signed the prenup, Clara. My lawyers, heavy hitters from Sullivan and Cromwell, made sure it's ironclad. If you try to fight this, I will bury you in legal fees until you're living in a cardboard box." Clara looked at the papers. The header read, "Sterling v. Sterling petition for dissolution of marriage." It was a brutal document. It stripped her of everything. It painted her as a dependent, a leech, who had contributed nothing to the rise of Sterling Dynamics Richard's tech empire. "You're leaving me with nothing," Clara stated. It wasn't a question. It was a clarification. "I'm leaving you with your freedom," Richard countered, his tone hardening. "And 50 grand, which is 50 grand more than you had when I found you waiting tables. Don't be greedy, Clara. It doesn't suit you." Jessica chimed in, her voice high and sugary, laced with venom. "Richard is being generous, sweetie. You should just sign. Imagine the embarrassment of a trial. Everyone knowing you couldn't keep a man like him." Clara slowly lifted her gaze. For the first time, she looked directly at Jessica. Her eyes were a startling icy blue, a detail Richard usually ignored. For a second, just a split second, Jessica flinched. There was something ancient and dangerous behind that gaze, like a shark surfacing in calm waters. But then the look was gone. Clara reached into her purse. Richard tensed. He expected a scene. Screaming. Crying. Maybe she would throw a vase. He had his security team on standby in the hallway, ready to escort her out the moment she became hysterical. He wanted her to be hysterical. It would validate everything he had told his friends, that she was unstable, clingy, unworthy of the sterling name. Instead, Clara pulled out a simple black pen. She didn't read the clauses. She didn't ask for a lawyer. She didn't ask about the dog or the summer house in the Hamptons or the stocks. She flipped to the final page. Scritch, scratch, she signed her name. Clara A. Sterling. Then she closed the folder and pushed it back toward him. The room went silent. The only sound was the rain and the distant hum of the penthouse's climate control. Richard blinked, stunned. He frowned, looking at the signature, then back at her. You signed it?" "Yes," Clara said, standing up. She smoothed down her simple grey skirt. "Is that all?" Richard felt a surge of irrational anger. This was too easy. He had prepared a speech about her inadequacy. He had prepared to destroy her. Her compliance felt like an insult. "You understand what this means. You walk out of here with the clothes on your back. No alimony, no access to the social circles. You are nobody again." "I understand perfectly, Richard," Clara said. She turned to the door. "I'll have my things packed within the hour." "You have an hour," Richard snapped, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Security will check your bags. Make sure you don't steal any of the silver." Clara stopped in the doorway. She didn't turn around. "Keep the silver, Richard. It's plated anyway." Then she walked out. Richard stared at the empty doorway, his face flushing red. "Plated that ungrateful. Let her go, baby," Jessica cooed, grabbing his arm. "She's in shock. She's probably going to go cry in her old Honda. You won, Richard. You're free." Richard looked down at the signed papers. He had won. He had kept his fortune, his company, and his reputation intact. So why did he feel a cold knot of dread forming in his stomach? Why did her silence feel louder than a scream? Upstairs in the master bedroom that was no longer hers, Clara moved with military precision. She didn't pack clothes. She didn't pack the designer bags Richard had bought her for photo ops. She opened the back of her closet, reached into a hollowed-out space behind the drywall, a space Richard never knew existed, and pulled out a small, battered leather satchel. Inside were 3 items: a passport with a different name, a burner phone, and a black titanium card with no numbers, only a singular embossed crest of a falcon. She checked the phone. One unread message. "Sender, protocol 0, message. The jet is in Teterboro. Are you active?" Clara's fingers hovered over the screen. She looked around the room at the cold luxury that had been her prison for 5 years. She thought of Richard's smug face. She thought of the $50,000. She typed a single word: active. She grabbed the satchel and walked out of the Sterling mansion into the pouring rain. She didn't call an Uber. She walked 2 blocks down to the corner of 5th and Main, where a blacked-out Cadillac Escalade was idling. The driver, a man the size of a linebacker with a scar running down his cheek, stepped out immediately. He held an umbrella over her, shielding her from the downpour. "Welcome back, madame," he said, his voice a deep rumble of respect. "Mr. Kane is waiting." "Take me to the airfield, Harris," Clara said, her voice dropping the soft, submissive timbre she had used for 5 years. It was now sharp, commanding the voice of a woman who owned rooms before she even entered them. "And Harris?" "Yes, madame." "Call the legal team in Zurich. Richard thinks the divorce is over. Tell them I'm about to redefine the word settlement." "Tuth." Richard Sterling celebrated his divorce the way he did everything else, loudly and expensively. 3 days after Clara left, he hosted a freedom party on his 200-foot super yacht. The Titan docked in the harbor. Champagne flowed like water. Cristal, naturally. The music thumped bass heavy enough to rattle the sternum as Seattle's elite mingled with models and tech investors. Jessica was the centerpiece draped in a red Versace gown, playing the role of the future Mrs. Sterling to perfection. Richard held a glass of scotch leaning against the railing, listening to Arthur Pendleton, his chief legal counsel. Arthur was a man who charged $1,500 an hour to destroy lives, and he looked worried. "Relax, Arthur." Richard laughed, clapping the older man on the back. "She signed. It's done. Why do you look like someone shot your dog?" Arthur adjusted his spectacles. "It's the bank accounts, Richard." Richard frowned. "What about them? Did she try to withdraw more than the 50 grand I told you to flag it?" "No," Arthur said, lowering his voice. "That's just it. She hasn't touched the 50 grand. She hasn't touched anything. We tracked her social security number. No apartment rental applications, no credit card hits, no flight bookings, nothing." Richard scoffed. "So she's probably crashing on a friend's couch in Iowa, paying cash for cheap motel rooms. She's humiliated, Arthur. She's hiding." "It's not just that," Arthur pressed. "I ran a standard post-separation liability check, just to make sure she didn't accrue any secret debts we'd be on the hook for. Richard, she doesn't exist." The music seemed to dim in the background. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Clara Davenport from Iowa," Arthur said, pulling up a file on his tablet. "Birth certificate. It's a masterful forgery, but it's a forgery. High school records. They lead to a school that burned down in 1998. The university degree she claimed to have, the registrar has no record of her. The woman you were married to for 5 years. On paper, she's a ghost." Richard felt a chill that had nothing to do with the sea breeze. He remembered the night he met her. He had been at a diner in Chicago late after a deal gone wrong. She was the waitress. Quiet, observant. She had spilled coffee on him, and he had charmed her. He liked that she didn't know who he was. He liked that she was a blank slate he could mold. "She's a con artist," Richard hissed, his grip tightening on the glass. "She played me. That's why she signed so fast. She didn't want us digging." "If she's a con artist," Arthur pointed out, "she's the worst one in history. She walked away with nothing. Cons don't do that. They take you for half." "Then what is she?" "I don't know," Arthur said grimly. "But my contacts at the agency Private Intelligence said that when they ran her biometric data from her old passport photo, the system flagged a level 5 security block. That's Pentagon-level Richard, or higher. Someone very powerful scrubbed her past." Richard stared out at the dark water. The arrogance that usually fueled him was sputtering. He didn't like unknowns. He destroyed competitors because he knew their weaknesses. He knew nothing about the woman who had slept in his bed for 5 years. "Find her," Richard commanded. "I don't care what it costs. Hire private investigators. Track her phone. If she lied about her identity, that voids the prenup in a bad way. I can sue her for fraud. I can reclaim the 50 grand. I want her destroyed, Arthur. I want her in jail." 3,000 miles away in a private hangar at Le Bourget Airport in Paris, Clara sat in a velvet armchair aboard a jet that made Richard's Titan look like a dinghy. The interior of the plane was lined with rare mahogany and cream leather. There was no brand name plastered everywhere, just quiet, suffocating opulence. Sitting across from her was Sebastian Kane. Sebastian was a man who rarely appeared on Forbes lists, mostly because he paid very expensive people to keep his name off them. He controlled shipping lanes, rare earth mines, and rumor had it, several small governments. He was in his 50s, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a Savile Row suit, sipping an espresso. "You look tired, Clara," Sebastian said gently. "I've been playing a housewife for 5 years, Uncle." Clara replied, kicking off her heels and curling her legs under her. "Do you know how exhausting it is to pretend that Richard Sterling is the smartest person in the room? I deserve an Oscar." Sebastian chuckled. The assignment was necessary. Sterling Dynamics was developing the encryption key that the cartel was trying to buy. We needed eyes on the inside to ensure the tech didn't fall into the wrong hands. You did your job. The tech is secure. The threat is neutralized. You could have just walked away. "I did walk away," Clara said, staring at the clouds outside the window. "But he was cruel, Sebastian. It wasn't just the cheating. It was the way he looked at me. Like I was dirt. Like I was disposable." Sebastian set his cup down. His eyes, usually warm when looking at his favorite niece, turned hard. "And now he's trying to hunt you. My security team intercepted a query from a PI firm in Seattle. They're digging into the Davenport alias." Clara smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Let them dig. They'll only find what we want them to find." "He's filed a motion," Sebastian continued, sliding a legal brief across the table. "He's suing you for fraud. He wants to drag you back to court in Seattle. He claims you falsified your identity to marry him, which constitutes marital fraud. He wants to publicly humiliate you to protect his stock price." Clara picked up the document. Richard wasn't satisfied with her leaving. He wanted to make an example of her. He wanted to parade her through the court system as a liar and a thief. "He wants a court date," Clara asked. "Next Tuesday, Superior Court of Washington, Judge Holloway presiding. Holloway plays golf with Richard." Clara laughed. It was a dark, rich sound. "He thinks he's summoning a waitress named Clara Davenport. He thinks he's going to crush a helpless woman who can't afford a lawyer." She stood up and walked to the mirror on the cabin wall. She looked at her reflection. The meek housewife was gone. In her place was Clara Kane, heir to the Kane Consortium, a woman educated at the Sorbonne and trained by Mossad agents, a woman who managed billion-dollar hedge funds before breakfast. "Turn the plane around, Sebastian," Clara said. Sebastian raised an eyebrow. "To where?" "Seattle," Clara said, turning back to him with a feral grin. "Richard wants his day in court. I'll give it to him. But I'm not going as Clara Davenport, and I'm certainly not going quietly." "You're going to reveal yourself?" Sebastian asked. "That breaks protocol." "The assignment is over," Clara said, pouring herself a glass of vintage Dom Perignon. "Now it's personal." "He wanted a show. Let's give him a show." She took a sip, her eyes flashing. "Call the family, Sebastian. Call the board. I want everyone there. I want the convoy. I want the press. And get me the best divorce attorney in the world, not to defend me, but to eviscerate him." Sebastian smiled, pulling out his phone. "I'll call Lady Sterling in London. She's been dying to wear her new hat." Clara looked out the window as the jet began to bank, turning away from the safety of Europe and back toward the storm in Seattle. "Richard Sterling wanted a war," she whispered to the glass. "He just forgot to check who he was fighting." The week leading up to the court date was a masterclass in media manipulation. Richard Sterling, utilizing his connections with the conglomerates that owned the major tabloids, painted a portrait of a victimized genius. The headlines were brutal. From waitress to wrecker. How Clara Davenport duped tech mogul Richard Sterling. The $50,000 settlement. Did the runaway wife steal corporate secrets? Richard sat in his corner office at Sterling Dynamics, overlooking the Seattle skyline. He scrolled through the comments on a New York Post article. They were vicious. The public hated her. They saw a woman who had trapped a billionaire and then fled when the prenup didn't pay out. "It's trending, Richard," Jessica said, pacing the office in a pair of Louboutins that cost more than Clara's supposed severance check. "Everyone is on your side. Even the feminist blogs are calling her a failure to the movement for being so submissive." Richard leaned back, satisfied. "It's not enough to win, Jessica. I need to make sure she can never show her face in this town again. If she tries to get a job at a Starbucks, I want the manager to recognize her and point to the door." But sitting across from him, Arthur Pendleton was sweating. The seasoned attorney was wiping his forehead with a handkerchief, his stack of files trembling slightly. "Richard, please listen to me," Arthur pleaded. "We received a notification from the court clerk this morning. The defendant, Clara, has replaced her legal counsel." Richard laughed. "Replaced with who? Some public defender? Did she find a strip mall lawyer who takes coupons?" "No," Arthur whispered. "She retained the firm of Hale, Sterling and Roth." Richard froze. The laughter died in his throat. "Hale, Sterling and Roth. That's a London firm. They represent the Crown. They represent oil states. They don't take divorce cases in Seattle. They took this one," Arthur said, his voice grim. "Specifically, Dominic Hale is flying in." "Dominic Hale?" Richard stood up, his face losing color. Dominic Hale wasn't just a lawyer. He was a predator in a three-piece suit. He was known as the Butcher of the Bailey. He had famously bankrupted a Russian oligarch in a single afternoon over a shipping dispute. How the hell can Clara afford Dominic Hale? His retainer is $500,000 just to pick up the phone. "I don't know," Arthur admitted, "but there's more. I tried to subpoena her financial records again. The request was blocked, not by a Judge Richard, by the Department of State." "The State Department?" Richard slammed his hand on the desk. "She's a waitress from Iowa. What is going on?" "I think," Arthur said, standing up and grabbing his briefcase, "that we have kicked a hornet's nest. I strongly suggest we drop the fraud suit. Let her go. Give her the 50 grand and walk away." "Never," Richard snarled. "Richard, she's bluffing. She probably found some pro bono charity case loophole. I'm Richard Sterling. I built this city. I'm not running from a woman who buys her shoes at Target. We go to court on Tuesday, and we crush her." Meanwhile, the entire 45th floor of the Four Seasons Seattle had been booked under a shell company. Security was tight. 2 men in dark suits stood by the elevators. Earpieces wired, checking the ID of every housekeeping staff member who approached. Inside the presidential suite, the atmosphere was calm, almost surgical. Clara stood on a podium in the center of the living room. A team of 3 tailors moved around her, pins in their mouths, adjusting the hem of a navy blue dress. It wasn't flashy. It was structured severe and radiated power. It was a vintage Dior piece, modified for the modern silhouette. Sebastian Kane sat on the sofa watching the news on a muted flat-screen TV. "He's calling you a fraud on live television," Sebastian noted, gesturing to the screen where Richard was giving a reluctant interview to a local news anchor. "He's not wrong," Clara said, checking her reflection. I was a fraud. Clara Sterling was a lie. I'm just preparing to tell him the truth. The door to the suite opened, and a man walked in. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair, and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He wore a suit that cost more than Richard's car. This was Dominic Hale. "The paperwork is filed, Madam," Dominic said, his British accent crisp. "We have petitioned for a dismissal of the fraud charges, and we have filed a countersuit." "On what grounds?" Clara asked, stepping down from the podium. Dominic smiled, a terrifying, shark-like expression. "Defamation, emotional distress, and my personal favorite, a motion to annul the prenuptial agreement based on gross misrepresentation of assets." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Richard didn't hide assets. He loves showing them off." "He didn't hide them from you," Dominic corrected. "He hid them from the IRS. My team did a deep dive into Sterling Dynamics' offshore holdings in the Caymans. It seems Richard has been funneling company profits into personal accounts to avoid taxes, about $40 million worth." Sebastian let out a low whistle. "Sloppy." "Extremely," Dominic agreed. "We aren't just going to beat him in divorce court, Clara. By the time we leave that room, he will be under federal investigation. We are going to strip him to the bone." Clara walked over to the window. The rain was still falling. Somewhere out there, Richard was toasting to his victory, completely unaware that the guillotine blade was already falling. "I don't want his money," Clara said quietly. "I have enough money to buy his company 10 times over." "Then what do you want?" Dominic asked. Clara turned. Her blue eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth Richard had once claimed to love. "I want his pride," she said. "I want him to know that the nobody he threw away was the only thing keeping him safe." Tuesday morning arrived with a torrential downpour fitting for the mood in Seattle. The King County Superior Court was a zoo. Richard had leaked the court date to the press. There were satellite trucks from CNN, Fox, and TMZ parked along the curb. A crowd of onlookers had gathered, holding umbrellas, eager to see the tech billionaire take down his gold-digging ex-wife. At 8:45 a.m., a convoy of 3 silver Mercedes S-Class sedans pulled up. Richard Sterling stepped out of the middle car. He looked impeccable in a charcoal Tom Ford suit. He waved to the cameras, flashing a practiced, sorrowful smile. Jessica was by his side, dressed in a modest cream suit, playing the supportive partner. She clutched his arm, looking around nervously at the flashing lights. "Mr. Sterling, Mr. Sterling, is it true she stole company secrets?" a reporter shouted. "I can't comment on active litigation." Richard said, his voice projected perfectly for the microphones. "I just want justice. I want to move on with my life and protect my company from bad actors." He walked up the courthouse steps, Arthur trailing behind him like a funeral director. Inside the courtroom, the gallery was packed. Richard took his seat at the plaintiff's table. He checked his watch. 8:55 a.m. "She's late," Richard whispered to Arthur. "Typical. She's probably stuck in traffic in her Honda." "The judge won't like that," Arthur muttered, organizing his files. 8:58 a.m. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom didn't open. They didn't swing. A vibration seemed to pass through the building. Outside, the reporters who were packing up their gear stopped. A low rumble was growing louder, drowning out the city traffic. It wasn't a car. It was the distinct, rhythmic thumping of rotors. "Is that a helicopter?" a cameraman asked, pointing up. A massive twin-engine Sikorsky S-76, black with no registration numbers visible on the side, just a small gold falcon crest banked sharply over the city streets. It ignored standard flight paths. It descended aggressively toward the wide plaza in front of the courthouse. Police officers on the ground scrambled. This wasn't authorized, but as they reached for their radios, a voice cut through the police band. "Stand down. This is Diplomatic Transport Alpha 1. Clearance code Indigo 0 X-ray. Do not approach the landing zone." The helicopter touched down in the middle of the public plaza, the rotor wash blowing umbrellas inside out and sending news crews scrambling for cover. Richard, hearing the commotion outside, frowned. "What is that noise?" Before Arthur could answer, the courtroom doors banged open. But it wasn't Clara. 6 men in black tactical suits entered. They wore earpieces and moved with the synchronized fluidity of special forces. They didn't look at the judge. They didn't look at the bailiff. They took up positions along the aisle and at the front of the bar. Judge Halloway banged his gavel. "What is the meaning of this? You can't bring weapons in here." "Bailiff." The bailiff, an older man, stepped forward, but was stopped by one of the men in suits who simply held up a badge. The bailiff froze, his eyes going wide. He looked at the judge and mouthed one word. "Federal." Then the silence fell. From the hallway, the clicking of heels echoed. Click, click, click. It was a slow, deliberate rhythm. Clara appeared in the doorway. Richard turned in his chair, a smirk ready on his lips. He prepared to see the broken woman. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The woman in the doorway was Clara, but it wasn't his Clara. She wore the navy Dior dress that hugged her frame like armor. Over her shoulders was a white cashmere coat that looked like it cost more than the average American home. She wore sunglasses oversized black, which she slowly removed as she stepped into the room. Her hair was no longer in a messy bun. It was a sleek, glossy cascade down her back. But it was the jewelry that made the air leave the room. Around her neck sat the Kane legacy, a sapphire and diamond necklace that had last been seen in a museum in Vienna. It glinted under the harsh courtroom lights, a cold blue fire. Behind her walked Dominic Hale, carrying a slim leather briefcase. Behind him walked Sebastian Kane. Clara didn't look at the gallery. She didn't look at the press, who had snuck into the back. She walked down the center aisle, her gaze fixed straight ahead. As she passed Richard's table, the scent of her perfume hit him. It wasn't the vanilla drugstore spray she used to wear. It was oud and rare roses, a custom blend he had once smelled on a Saudi princess during a business trip. She stopped at the defendant's table. Dominic pulled out her chair. She sat crossing her legs and placed a singular object on the table, the black titanium card with the falcon crest. Richard felt a cold sweat break out on his back. He looked at Arthur. Arthur was pale as a sheet, staring at Dominic Hale. "That's Dominic Hale," Arthur squeaked. "Richard, that's the butcher." Judge Halloway, recovering from the shock of the armed guards, cleared his throat. He looked at the woman before him, then at his docket. "State your name for the record." Clara didn't stand up. She adjusted the microphone, leaning in slightly. "Clara Kane," she said. Her voice was deeper, richer. "Formerly Sterling, currently the chairwoman of the Kane Consortium." The courtroom gasped. A murmur rippled through the gallery. "Kane," someone whispered. "Like Kane Shipping. The global logistics empire." Richard blinked. "Kane, no. That's impossible. Her name is Davenport." "Mr. Sterling," the judge snapped. Silence. Dominic Hale stood up, buttoning his jacket. Your Honor, we are here to address the frivolous motion of fraud brought by the plaintiff. But first, we would like to submit evidence that the plaintiff, Mr. Sterling, does not actually possess the financial standing to sue my client. Excuse me. Richard stood up, ignoring Arthur's tug on his sleeve. I am worth $2 billion. Dominic smiled. He picked up a document from his briefcase. Correction, Dominic said smoothly. As of 9:30 a.m. this morning, 3 minutes ago, the Kane Consortium has acquired a controlling interest in the debt of Sterling Dynamics. We have effectively called in your loans. Mr. Sterling, technically speaking, my client now owns your chair, your desk, and the suit you are standing in. The silence that followed was absolute. Richard looked at Clara. She turned her head slowly, meeting his eyes. For the first time in 5 years, he saw the truth. He wasn't the shark. He was the chum. Clara offered him a small, pitying smile. I told you, Richard, she said softly, her voice carrying across the silent room. You should have let me keep the silver. The silence in the courtroom was not the quiet of peace. It was the vacuum before an explosion. Richard Sterling stood frozen, his hand halfway raised in protest. His mind couldn't process the words Dominic Hale had just spoken. Controlling interest in the debt, called in the loans. It sounded like gibberish. Sterling Dynamics was untouchable. He was untouchable. This is absurd, Richard finally sputtered, his laugh sounding manic. Your Honor, this is a stunt, a cheap theatrical trick to distract from the fact that this woman is a fraud. I want her arrested for perjury. Judge Halloway looked down at the documents Dominic had placed on the bench. He adjusted his glasses, flipping a page. His eyebrows shot up toward his hairline. He looked at the seal on the documents, the undeniable heavy embossing of the International Banking Commission. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, his voice unusually high. I suggest you sit down. I will not sit down, Richard shouted, his composure fracturing. He pointed a shaking finger at Clara. She's a nobody, a waitress. She doesn't have the money to buy a coffee, let alone my debt. Clara didn't blink. She simply tapped a finger on the mahogany table. Tap, tap. Dominic Hale stepped forward again. Mr. Sterling operates under the delusion that his company is liquid. In reality, Sterling Dynamics has been leveraging its assets to fund his extravagant lifestyle. The loans were held by a consortium of banks in Zurich. The Kane Consortium purchased those notes at 8:55 a.m. Clause 14b of the lending agreement states that in the event of a change in ownership of the debt, the new holder may demand immediate repayment of the principal if the borrower is deemed high risk. Dominic turned to Richard, his smile razor-sharp. We deem you very high risk, Richard. Richard's phone buzzed in his pocket. Then again. Then it began to vibrate continuously. He pulled it out, ignoring the bailiff's glare. Notification. Bank of America. Account frozen. Due to creditor action. Notification. Chase Sapphire. Card declined. Text from CFO Richard. What is happening? The accounts are locked. Payroll is bouncing. Who is Kane? Richard felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at Arthur Pendleton. His lawyer was furiously typing on his tablet, his face grey. It's true, Arthur whispered, horrified. They put a lien on everything, Richard. The operating accounts, the real estate holding, even the yacht. The yacht is in an LLC, Richard hissed. They pierced the corporate veil, Arthur said, looking at Dominic with a mix of fear and awe. They proved commingling of funds. Richard, they have everything. Clara leaned into the microphone again. The courtroom held its breath. I tried to leave quietly, Richard, she said, her voice smooth and devoid of anger, which made it all the more terrifying. I offered you a clean break, but you wanted a public spectacle. You wanted to verify my assets. She gestured to Dominic. My net worth is roughly $40 billion, Clara said. Give or take market fluctuations. The $50,000 you offered me, I spent more than that on the fuel to fly here today. A gasp rippled through the gallery. The reporters in the back were furiously typing into their phones. The headline had already changed. Waitress wife revealed as secret billionaire heiress. Richard sank into his chair. He looked at Jessica. She was staring at Clara, her mouth slightly open, eyes wide. She wasn't looking at Richard with adoration anymore. She was looking at the woman across the aisle like she was a god. Your Honor, Dominic said. Given that the plaintiff filed this suit under the false pretense that my client was destitute and seeking to defraud him for money she clearly does not need, we move for immediate dismissal with prejudice. Furthermore, we are serving Mr. Sterling with a countersuit for defamation of character. We will be seeking damages. Damages, Richard croaked. You took my company. We took your collateral, Dominic corrected. The defamation suit is personal. We are asking for $1. It's the principle, you see. Judge Halloway banged his gavel. Case dismissed. Mr. Sterling, get your affairs in order, and God help you. The courtroom erupted. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions. Ms. Kane, why did you hide your identity? Richard, are you bankrupt? Is it true your family owns the shipping lines? Clara stood up. The 6 security guards immediately formed a phalanx around her. She didn't look back at Richard. She turned and walked down the aisle, the white coat flowing behind her like a royal cape. Richard sat alone at the table. Arthur was packing his briefcase with frantic speed. Where are you going? Richard demanded, grabbing Arthur's arm. Fix this file, an injunction. I can't represent you anymore, Richard, Arthur said, pulling his arm away. My firm has a conflict of interest. What conflict? We represent the Kane Consortium in London, Arthur said, avoiding his eyes. We didn't know it was her. I'm sorry, Richard. You're on your own. Arthur scurried away, leaving Richard sitting in the wreckage of his life. He looked for Jessica. She was standing near the exit, typing on her phone. Jessica, Richard said, standing up on shaky legs. We need to go. The press is swarming. Bring the car around. Jessica looked up. Her eyes were cold. She didn't move. The rain had stopped when Richard exited the courthouse, but the storm was far from over. He pushed through the mob of reporters, shielding his face with his suit jacket. No comment. No comment. He reached the curb where his convoy was waiting. But the drivers weren't opening the doors. In fact, the drivers weren't there. 2 men in blue overalls were attaching chains to the front bumper of his Mercedes S-Class. A tow truck was idling in front of it. Hey, Richard shouted, running forward. What are you doing? That's my car. One of the tow truck drivers, a burly man with a cigarette dangling from his lip, checked a clipboard. Repo order, issued by Kane Financial Services. Default on lease payments. I don't lease, Richard screamed. I own this car. Says here you used the title as collateral for a business loan last year. The driver shrugged. Bank called the loan. Keys, please. Richard stared at him. He looked around for the other cars. They were all being booted or hooked up to trucks. He spun around to find Jessica. She was standing on the sidewalk under the awning of the courthouse, staying dry. She was holding her phone, scrolling through Instagram. Jessica, Richard yelled. Call an Uber. They're taking the cars. Jessica looked up. She slowly walked down the steps, careful not to get her heels wet in the puddles. She stopped a few feet away from him. "I can't do that, Richard," she said. Her voice was different. The sugary sweetness was gone, replaced by a flat nasal annoyance. "What do you mean? Just call a car?" "I mean," Jessica said, inspecting her manicure, "that my credit card was linked to your corporate account, and since that's frozen, I'm broke." "It's temporary," Richard insisted, grabbing her shoulders. "It's a banking error. I'll fix it. We'll go to the penthouse. I have cash in the safe." Jessica laughed. It was a cruel, sharp sound. She shrugged his hands off her shoulders. "You don't get it, do you?" she said, sneering. "I just saw the news, Richard. You didn't just lose the company. You lost the woman. Do you know who Clara Kane is? She's royalty, and you treated her like she was the help." "She tricked me," Richard cried. "She lied." "She tested you," Jessica corrected. "And you failed. Hard." She took a step back. A black SUV pulled up to the curb, an Uber black. "Where are you going?" Richard asked, panic rising in his chest. "You're coming with me." "To where?" Jessica asked. "The penthouse. The doorman just texted me. The locks have been changed. The building management was notified of the foreclosure." She opened the door to the Uber. "Jessica, wait. I love you." Richard was desperate now, grasping at straws. "We can get through this." Jessica paused. She looked at him. Really looked at him for the first time, without the filter of his money. She saw a sweating, balding man in a suit that was suddenly too big for him. "You don't love me, Richard," she said. "You loved that I made you feel big, but you look really small right now." She got in the car. "Wait." Richard lunged for the door. "Give me back the bracelet, the tennis bracelet. It's worth 50 grand. Jessica rolled down the window just an inch. She held up her wrist, flashing the diamonds. "Consider it severance pay," she said. The window rolled up and the car sped away, splashing dirty puddle water onto Richard's Italian leather shoes. Richard stood alone on the curb. The reporters had gotten their shots and were losing interest, moving on to edit their footage. The tow truck dragged his Mercedes away with a screech of tires. He patted his pockets. Wallet, phone. He opened his banking app again. Balance. 42,000 pounds Holland. He checked his personal savings. Balance, 0,000. He tried to call his CFO. Straight to voicemail. He tried to call his mother. Straight to voicemail. He looked up at the sky. The helicopter was long gone. The private jet was probably already halfway to Paris or Bali or wherever billionaires went to laugh at the peasants. He was Richard Sterling. He was a visionary. He was a titan of industry. And he didn't have enough money for a bus ticket. High above the clouds inside the Gulf Stream, the atmosphere was quiet. Clara had changed out of the court dress into a soft cashmere sweater and leggings. She was curled up in the oversized seat, a glass of water in her hand. Sebastian sat across from her, reviewing the acquisition files. "We have the assets secured," Sebastian said. "Sterling Dynamics will be absorbed into Kane Tech. We'll strip the branding, fire the board, and keep the engineering team. They were the only good part of the company anyway." "And the house?" Clara asked. "Foreclosed. We'll put it on the market next month. Proceeds go to the charity of your choice." "The shelter for battered women in downtown Seattle," Clara said instantly. "Name the wing after him." "The Richard Sterling Center for Second Chances." Sebastian chuckled. "That is wonderfully petty. I love it." He looked at his niece. She didn't look triumphant. She looked tired. "Are you happy, Clara?" Clara looked out the window. The sun was setting, painting the horizon in gold and purple. "I'm not happy, Uncle," she said. "He was my husband. I loved him once. It's not a victory to realize the person you slept next to was a monster. It's just a relief." "What will you do now?" Sebastian asked. "Return to the family business. The board seat is yours if you want it." Clara shook her head. "Not yet. I spent 5 years playing a role. I forgot who I was. I need to find Clara Kane again." "And where will you do that?" Clara smiled. She reached into her bag and pulled out a brochure she had picked up weeks ago before the divorce, before the storm. "There's a vineyard in Tuscany," she said. "It's failing. Bad management, terrible wine, but beautiful soil. I bought it this morning under a shell company." "You want to farm grapes?" Sebastian raised an eyebrow. "I want to build something real," Clara said. "Something that grows from the dirt up. No lies, no pretenses, just work." "Tuscany it is," Sebastian said, tapping the intercom. "Pilot change, of course. Florence." Clara closed her eyes. For the first time in 5 years, she didn't have to worry about whether her dress was right, or if she was laughing at the right jokes, or if she was taking up too much space. She took a deep breath. She was free, but the story wasn't quite over. Because in the world of the Kanes, loose ends were never left tied. And Richard Sterling was a loose end that was about to unravel completely. 6 months later. The Tuscan sun was heavy and sweet, smelling of warm earth and ripening grapes. In the rolling hills of Chianti, the Villa della Pace, Villa of Peace, had undergone a transformation. The once crumbling stone walls were restored, the overgrown vines pruned into neat, productive rows. Clara stood in the vineyard, wearing work boots, jeans, and a linen shirt stained with soil. Her hands, once manicured to perfection for gala dinners, were rougher now, calloused from pruning shears. She ran a hand over a cluster of Sangiovese grapes. They were deep purple, almost black and bursting with juice. "They are ready, signora," said Marco, the old vineyard manager, who had come with the property. He looked at her with genuine respect, not because of her money. He didn't know she was a billionaire, but because she was the first owner in 50 years who actually woke up at 5:00 a.m. to work the fields with him. "We harvest tomorrow at dawn, Marco," Clara said, smiling. "Call the village. We'll need extra hands." "Si, signora." As Marco walked away, a black Range Rover wound its way up the dusty, cypress-lined driveway. Clara watched it approach. She didn't flinch. She knew who it was. Sebastian Kane stepped out. He wasn't wearing his usual 3-piece suit. He was in casual chinos and a polo shirt, looking relaxed. He held a bottle of wine in one hand and a thick manila envelope in the other. "The 2018 vintage," Sebastian said, handing her the bottle. "From the family reserves in Bordeaux. I thought you might need a celebration drink." "Celebration?" Clara wiped her hands on a rag. "Is it done?" Sebastian nodded. He placed the envelope on the rustic outdoor table. "The federal investigation is closed," he said. "The SEC found undeniable proof of embezzlement, tax evasion, and insider trading at Sterling Dynamics. The forensic accounting team you hired, they didn't miss a single penny." "And Richard?" Clara asked. She didn't ask with malice. She asked with the distant curiosity one might have about a storm that had passed. "He took a plea deal," Sebastian said, pulling out a photo from the envelope. Clara looked at it. It was a grainy paparazzi shot taken outside a federal courthouse in Seattle. Richard looked 20 years older. His hair was thinning, his face gaunt. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit, his wrists cuffed to his waist. 5 years in federal prison, Sebastian explained, followed by 10 years of probation. He's barred from serving as an officer of any public company for life. His assets were liquidated to pay off the creditors. The penthouse, the cars, the watch collection, all gone. And Jessica, Sebastian smirked. She testified against him in exchange for immunity. She claimed she was a victim of his manipulation. She's currently trying to launch a reality show about being a survivor. It has 0 viewers. Clara looked at the photo of Richard one last time. She remembered the day she signed the divorce papers. The arrogance, the cruelty, the way he had reduced her entire existence to a $50,000 check. She felt nothing, no joy, no anger, just a quiet sense of balance restored. The universe had corrected itself. She slid the photo back into the envelope. "Burn it," she said. Sebastian struck a match. They watched the envelope catch fire in the stone fire pit, the flames curling around the image of Richard Sterling until he was nothing but ash carried away by the Tuscan breeze. "There is one last thing," Sebastian said, his tone shifting. "A letter. He wrote it from his holding cell. He begged his lawyer to get it to you." He held out a folded piece of lined paper. Clara hesitated. Then she took it. She unfolded the cheap, rough paper. The handwriting was shaky desperate. "Clara, I know you probably won't read this. I know I don't deserve it. But I have to ask. Why you had billions? You could have left me years ago. You could have crushed me the day we met. Why did you stay? Why did you pretend to be nothing? I sit here every night thinking about it. I treated you like you were lucky to be with me. But the whole time you were the one holding the sky up. I was the king of a cardboard castle, and I didn't even know it. If I had just known who you really were, I would have been different." "Ah." Clara read the words twice. "If I had known who you really were, I would have been different." She laughed softly, a sad final sound. "That's exactly why I left him," she whispered. "What does it say?" Sebastian asked. "He says he would have loved me if he knew I was rich," Clara said, crumpling the letter. "He still doesn't get it. He thinks value comes from a bank account. He thinks power comes from a name." She threw the crumpled ball of paper into the dying embers of the fire. "He never saw me," Clara said, looking out over her vineyard where the grapes were heavy and sweet, grown from her own hard work, not her inheritance. "He only saw the reflection of what he wanted to see, a prop, a fan, a victim." She turned to Sebastian, her blue eyes bright and fierce. "I'm not Clara Sterling anymore. I'm not even just Clara Kane. I'm just Clara." "And Clara," Sebastian said, pouring 2 glasses of wine, "has a harvest to lead." The next morning, the sun rose over Tuscany in a blaze of gold. Clara was already in the fields, her shears clicking rhythmically. She wasn't wearing diamonds. She wasn't flying in a private jet. She was sweating, huffing with Marco, her hands stained purple with the juice of the grapes. She was building something real. Far away in a cold concrete cell, Richard Sterling sat on a metal cot. The lights buzzed overhead. He stared at the blank wall, waiting for a future that would never come. He had wanted the world, but in his greed to own it, he had thrown away the only thing in it that was truly real. He had accepted the divorce with everything, and he had landed with nothing. And that is the story of Clara and Richard. It's a brutal reminder that in life the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. Richard measured his worth in dollars and forgot that character is the only currency that matters. He mistook Clara's silence for submission and her kindness for weakness. By the time he realized his mistake, the jet had already taken off. If you enjoyed this story of justice, revenge, and reclaiming one's power, please hit the like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. And tell me in the comments, do you think Richard deserved his fate, or was Clara too harsh? I read every comment. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.